Rob Kassees. God, I love talking about music. I love talking to songwriters. I love talking about music. Rob's got this really great podcast. So someone released, I don't know if you know the gentleman's name, Robert Diamri released 1,001 albums you must listen to before you die. You know, lists are lists, right? There's always controversy over them. So him and his fellow bandmates and friends from long time, they're all old school friends, go through each album. It's really amusing. It's never condescending. When I first heard, I thought it was going to be controlling, but it's not. Some of the episodes that I listened to that I wanted to talk about, Rio by Duran Duran. The Beatles stuff is very interesting. They actually take it by a side. So we go to Abbey Road side 1. He's done over a couple hundred of these. Really, really cool. Beck. I want to talk about the Carpenters, Alanis Morissette. These are some of the episodes I listen to. I want to bring up his first 2 albums he purchased when he was young during the MTV days. I wonder if you would guess where. They couldn't be more opposite, by the way. But really, really interesting. And he also has a couple of bands, the Beverly Crushers, which is, from, of course, Star Trek and The Next Generation. Really great. So it's kind of the Flight of the Conchords kind of vibe to it. It's got another band too. We talk about songwriting as well. Really great discussion with Rob Kassees. I loved it. And wonderful podcast, 1,001 albums. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission, how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision, growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Disciple Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Rob Kassees, thanks so much for your time. I'm really, really excited to talk to you. Generally speaking, do lists, especially music lists, suck?
Yes, for a couple reasons, I think. One, each list has an implied methodology, which itself is subjective and limiting. Two is the whole business of appreciating art and music is extremely subjective. So that said, I think the list makers know that there's nothing definitive about any of these rankings. They're clickbait and they're discussion starters, and that works for me.
And nobody, and you can't make everybody happy. I remember Rolling Stone used to come out with these lists every year, and they eventually stopped. But I mean, it's pretty much the same albums were the top 5 every year, of all time. What did it do? It just kind of, just drove discussion, I guess.
Yeah, which isn't a terrible thing. Even if you're arguing about who's wrong, they always say there's a truism on the internet that if you want to get engagement, you're better off putting something wrong out in the world because people will correct you much more readily. So
and I remember hearing opinions of like certain artists not liking other artists. I remember when I heard that, I think it was George Harrison that said that he didn't like U2. I think so. Just to say you just don't like not even one of their, it's just at least you would think artists would have a better opinion, but they have opinions like everybody else.
Yeah, of course. And I think a lot of artists avoid saying things like that. Of course, I'm partially here to talk about my podcast where we express a lot of opinions like that.
Yes.
But I'll also say that I think the words in our language sometimes they kind of fail us. The semantics fail us here
Mm,
because
mm,
the truth is I feel this way about so much art and music is I just haven't gotten to it yet. I don't
mm,
know enough to really have an opinion.
mm.
And so in other words, I'm currently not a YouTube fan. I think they have value. I respect them, but I just don't know enough. And maybe I'll get to them later and I'm fine with that.
I remember not liking particular bands and then, friends saying, just listen to this or just listen to that. We're going to get to some of
Sure.
the albums in your list. And then it kind of opens up. But let's talk about albums now, Rob. I mean, what's
Yeah.
happened to the actual album?
Yeah, I think sadly it was an art form that it didn't come and go exactly, but I have this theory that art forms have they get created at one point, like writing a story into the form of a novel. They have their peak where a lot of different kinds of creative energy are focused on making something in that art form, and then
Mm,
tend to exist for a long time after that. But maybe don't have the same number of participants, things like that. So in the same way that maybe Hollywood films don't have as much artistry now and a lot of that talent as
hmm.
television writing would be another example. I don't think that people not a ton of people are focused on making record albums now and their heyday was probably in the 1970s.
Hmm. Your first two albums, Dr. Feelgood and Forever Your Girl.
Yes, when I went to the mall record store, I think it was called The Wall, actually, that chain of record stores, when I was probably 10 or 11 with my $20 in hand. That's what I bought because that's what I was seeing on
Yeah.
MTV, I reckon.
Yeah, MTV shaped so many things back then. Has streaming helped or hurt not only the artist but the public, the listening public as well? What's your opinion on streaming?
Very philosophical questions, by the way, so thank you.
Mm,
I think it has helped, certainly, net positive on both the listener and the artist. As a listener, I think that it is easy to become detached from just how magical streaming is. And I spent so long, as I'm sure you did,
yeah.
wishing. I don't think I ever thought that something like this could exist, this magic thing in my pocket where I could get literally everything at the touch of a finger. Now, that's not to say it has had no negative effects, including on the listening experience. I think it promotes short attention span. I think that you have elements like the paradox of too many choices, right?
Mm,
It can be hard to find new things or even pick something when you're faced with the entire catalog of music. But
mm,
in general, it's been a boon to listeners, certainly. And I would argue it's been a boon to artists as well. It is a way to DIY everything about the process. You can not only make the records on your laptop at home, you can publish them yourself. And potentially you can get them out into the world. Now, of course, the number of artists, the splintering of genres, all that has made it more challenging. There's more
mm,
noise in the signal to noise ratio. But yeah, I certainly disagree with the knee jerk take that streaming is somehow bad for
mm.
art. I simply don't agree to that.
Certainly, it can. I remember seeing an interview with Rick Rubin, and he was saying when streaming first came out, he was so excited. He has this, the world's catalog. You can listen to any song at any moment. But then he said eventually he found out that he'd rather be programmed to because there was just so many options. He likes the idea of being programmed to a certain genre and maybe float in some things he hasn't heard for a long time or that wouldn't be in his favorites, and so he actually preferred that and now loves the choice of both. Very interesting.
It is interesting, and I personally don't feel I know what he's talking about because I
Mm.
watched MTV, I listened to the radio for
Yeah.
so much time, so much of my music listening is through those avenues, and I'd say separately, I've listened to plenty of friends' playlists put on music
Right.
throughout the
Right.
years, which can still be a really rewarding
Mm.
experience.
Mm.
That said, I don't think technology has quite cracked the recommendation engine in the way that
Mm.
he might be thinking. Maybe that's just a personal opinion, but I don't use Spotify's discovery playlist as much as I think they were hoping I would.
Mm. Yeah, I tend to listen to my own likes or favorites, my own long playlist that keeps on expanding. But then, the girlfriend gets in the car and she's like, put on 80s or put on 90s stuff. And I said, oh, okay. I said, wow, I forgot about this song.
Sure.
Yeah, this artist, I forgot about this artist completely. What a great song. I heard a George Michael song, Too Funky, is that what it's called? One of his later releases. I said, I forgot all about this style of these later albums from George Michael. So it is a way of listening to some things that you just wouldn't before hear before. It's nice.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? That was a big part of why we started our weekly podcast was
Mm,
to stay in touch with discovering new music as a friend group. We wanted, as life goes on, as you get more and more responsibilities and you just don't have as much time to go out there and find all these things. So the fact that we listen to an album every week and then review it on the show is a great vehicle for consistent discovery and discussion.
awesome podcast. But so I get introduced to I'll get to it in a moment. I get introduced to new music like Saturday Night Live or some shows I might watch, see an artist come on. Oh, this is something I'm interested in. This is something I'm not interested in. But other than that, how do people find new music?
Yeah, I agree. It's challenging. You hear stuff in a commercial, you get a viral video on
Right.
TikTok, something like that. I'm not sure how it's working for the young generation,
Right.
but if they're anything like me, your ears are kind of just always perked up to something
Mm,
interesting and new. And I should clarify, right, that even when I was a young kid watching MTV, I was aware of the kind of mainstream stuff they were putting out. Like, for instance, they used to do video countdowns, and Michael Jackson's Thriller would always
that's
be
right.
number one, and Pearl Jam's Jeremy would always be up in those.
Mm,
But at the same time, if you watched late at night, you'd get stuff like 120 minutes, or even when Beavis and Butthead would watch music videos, and that became a
mm.
discovery mechanism for me as well. So I think if you're just like kind of tuned in, you'll find stuff.
But one thing, also, and I get to the podcast, but about the streaming is that so when we were kids, I think I'm a little bit older than you, Rob, but concerts were $20, were $10, but they would keep
Sure.
on saying, go buy the album," because the album was making money. It's the complete opposite now, right? So
Yeah.
the albums are free, but the shows are so expensive and they're all over. And the kids today do go to a lot of shows. Bad Bunny sells out huge stadiums everywhere, right? I mean, uh, so there's definitely lots of attendance, lots of people going to watch music, live music, which is great.
I think, yeah, you're making a good point, and this is another way of discovery, and it has been for me over the years, is going to not just those huge arena shows, which don't get me wrong, are great. I love the
Mm,
theatricality
mm,
associated with shows. I love when bands can be visual and change arrangements to fill a space like that. Really cool experience. But also going to small local clubs with
mm,
small touring bands and paying that $20 cover or less if it's a local show and being surprised. And that has happened to me many times as well. And certainly I went to way more of those kinds of shows in my 20s than
mm,
I do now, but
mm,
I still try to
mm,
get out there and go like, "Hey, I'm interested in this. I don't really even know the record. I'm not 100% sure what it's going to be like, but it's local and I'm just going to go support live music
mm,
and
mm.
see if I can be enthralled." And periodically it happens and you find a new great band.
Really good point, Rob. And then the bands will be promoting their Spotify channel, and you can send them tips right through different apps, and the way it's set up, it's very convenient. So Robert Damry released the 1001 must listen to albums. So this is what we started with. We have this list.
Yes.
So you and your friends, which are also bandmates you've known
Yeah.
for a long time, get together and you review each one. And it's a freaking great. Here's a couple things why I love it. The topic, of course, is great, but you guys you're not too inside.
Mm,
Sometimes when I hear a bunch of guys talking, they start like making these references to like things that they only know about and we don't.
sure.
But you guys are really good and you're fair. When I first started listening, I think, okay, this is going to be troll time, right? They're going to get. I want to start talking about Duran Duran Rio, right? Which is your
Mhm.
number 165, and I think, okay, it's going to be, but it's not that at all. It's not that at all. You guys have like what's your Twitter or your X kind of quick intro to the album, and then you go on, you
Yes.
talk, and then you read books, Rob. You read books on
Yes.
on Duran Duran, and you give us an education, and it's over an hour long. It's tremendous. So Duran Duran Rio, I got into this album for probably the best reason any young boy, man gets into it because a girl liked it, right?
Sure.
And told me and told me to listen to it, right? So, I mean, I remember the first time it's got all the lyrics. It was an album back then, and now it started from Rio and went, all the way to The Chauffeur, I think is the last song, I'm not sure. But, both sides would flip the album over. One of my favorites to this day because it's a real album. The songs are put in a specific order.
Yeah.
I love, and the genre is a little bit different, but it was popular back then. It was all over MTV. But tell me about the process now. So you guys get the album, you pick the song, you just take a whole week to learn and understand it.
Yeah, exactly. We started this, you can probably tell, because we love the idea
Yeah,
of discovering new music, as I said, and
yeah,
we love learning about it. And to
yeah.
be honest with you, I've been reading music memoirs for so long. I like learning
Mm,
about the background of records that I don't even like that much. It still
mm,
adds to my experience, right? So it's coming from that place. But yeah, every week we choose a random selection from that list that Robert Dimery published and has since updated a few times, called 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. And we try to take, you mentioned it, an outside look, but an informed musician level look. We were trying
mm.
to recreate the conversations that musicians have in the van on the way home from the gig. Any song comes on the radio, doesn't matter if it's a band we like, doesn't matter if it's a band we've never
Mm.
heard. There's always stuff to talk about. And that's how we get bands and musicians, I think, get a lot of their laughs. It's just chopping it up about songs. Add to that, I grew up listening to a lot of different podcasts, comedy podcasts, the NPR, This American Life, Freakonomics, stuff that's more edited together, Radio Lab. And so I wanted to find a way to do good research at the same time as making it like a friendly conversation. So
Mm.
that's the goal for us, is to learn, do the research, listen to the album, 10 times minimum. Then we kind of pare it down to a focus list of a couple songs we're going to really give timestamps and talk about specific notes for, but really it's about telling that story, which again, it always enhances, and we trade off who has to do that, right? So we kind of share the work in that way. But if I'm the one telling the story, of course, I'm going to gain a greater appreciation for where the band was at, what they were trying to accomplish. And I got to say that sometimes you try something and it's not super successful.
Mm.
Other times you try something that is successful, but either way, understanding where people are coming from to me is important. And at the same time, of course, we're trying to make it funny. So when we do those tweet length reviews, they're particularly mean
Of
and
course.
snarky. Just,
Just like
you know,
Twitter.
yeah, just to try to make each other laugh.
Yeah,
We
yes,
typically have much more nuanced opinions we get into after that.
certainly.
But again, yeah, goal is to make each other laugh, learn stuff about music, whether we like it ultimately or not, and discover new stuff as we go. And Duran Duran was a great example. I had certainly written them off foolishly. I had heard those songs on the radio, but a close listen is really rewarding. They're better than I thought they were going to be. Maybe that's my own bias coming in, but that's a great experience as a listener to have low expectations and have them exceeded.
It really is, and, they're really good-looking band, right? So you see these 5
Sure.
really good-looking guys and, fashionably dressed, and MTV's there, so I remember the women loved them, right, of course, and all the men were like, "Well, they're just good-looking, they're not any good," but you come to find out they're really good musicians. You guys rant about John Taylor's bass. I mean, the bass in Rio itself
Oh
is
man.
crazy.
Crazy, crazy good bass player.
It's
Such
so
interesting
good.
bass
Yeah.
parts, kind of hidden, if you will, hidden in plain
Mm,
sight, but hidden within these pop songs. And that's what I found, is that sometimes that's what it takes. It takes
mm,
that kind of close paying attention listen to discover some of these things. And because I was raised on classic rock, the Beatles, Pink
mm,
Floyd, this
mm.
is the type of music that specifically rewards headphone listens. You hear things in the
Mm.
headphones that you would not hear otherwise, that you would not hear on the car stereo. And so I just think we've all kind of grown up on that. We're attuned to that. But yeah, when you look beneath the surface, when you really focus on it, and when you're kind of looking for what the musical parts are that comprise the song, you're gonna the good news is you find a lot of really cool stuff.
really do. And then, so I want to go now to 150. So what you do with the Beatles stuff, which you have to do. You go with Abbey Road in this
Yeah.
particular one, and you just say side one. Right. So
Yeah.
I remember only listening to side one. And so I
Yeah.
know the very clean difference between those two sides because on the
Sure. Of
vinyl. So
course.
so you start with side one, which is great. And it's some of your friends, it's like a great song come together. And then you have like, eventually you have Paul's Hammer, and then you have, Oh Darling. And then you have this kind of mixture of different songs. And, God, the way you guys go through it, I can't get enough.
Well, thank you. That's very high praise. We love, love, love the Beatles. I think we've made
Yeah.
that abundantly
Yeah.
clear
Of
in that
course.
episode and others. And I think that a lot of times what we're trying to do is, frankly, is to avoid just heaping praise on stuff we already know we like,
Mm,
you know?
mm,
And so that's why we save those episodes for special numbers and things like that, where I already knew all my friends loved Abbey Road. I knew I loved Abbey Road. Wasn't really a question of whether or not it's an essential album or not. Because
mm.
reminder, that is one of the things we do at the end of the
Right. You
episode. Every
vote.
episode, we vote on whether or
Mm,
not you really needed to hear this record before you died. But it's an interesting case study for me. I've been listening to that record for my entire life. I've
mm,
been reading about the Beatles for
mm,
my
mm,
entire life, watching all the documentaries. I've watched
mm.
all of them. My parents were big Beatles fans. It's been going on my whole life. And yet, diving in deeper, I still learned a lot. So I hope the challenge, of course, is there's a lot of Beatles nerds out there, myself
Mm,
included,
mm.
and it's hard to add something new to the canon. I'm really not even saying we did that, but we were certainly excited to talk about it amongst ourselves, to laugh about it, and to learn. And I learned a ton doing the research for that one.
Yeah, many of your buddies are like, this is my favorite album. I mean, my mother, Rob, would take away the Beatles albums to punish me, right? When I did something wrong. I mean, it was the
Sure.
worst thing that had. And then in
Huh.
Maxwell's Hammer, actually, there was a little skip. We had skips in the albums there, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know whoever doesn't vinyl, but there was one particular, lyric that just in my head, I memorized that skip. And when I heard it on CD later, I was like, oh man, of course there's that skip. What's happening? So it gets so ingrained. I remember the White Album, and opening it up. I remember buying it for the second time, and there's the 4 photos and just 2 albums, and each side was so distinct. Of course, I get a little angry too. I'm a Beatles nut like yourself of how much stuff they didn't let George do, and he released it all on
Mm,
his first album. But why did they have the slow revolution? Why did they have number 9? Why there's 4 or 5 songs that just uh,
sure.
but I
And if you think
digress.
about All Things Must Pass, it's just waiting in
Yes.
the wings. And they're like, no, we don't have
Waiting.
no room for that, George. Sorry.
Yes. Which is arguably the best solo Beatles album out of all 4 of them, right? I
Right,
would
right.
argue that itself. But a lot of those songs were made during those sessions. Why did they say no to um uh this the song that he did 2 versions of it, My Sweet Lord, and
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't It a Pity? Isn't It a Pity is what I was thinking. Gives me chills when I hear that song. And
Yeah.
to think that John and Paul said, no, it won't work on this album. Anyway.
I think I wasn't in the room, obviously, but I think
No.
it has something to do with George also feeling a sense of inferiority. He's kind of with the
Mm,
two big brother songwriters
right.
who were running the show. And so I just wonder how much he advocated for himself.
Mm, mm,
One could argue that the breakup of the Beatles was really about him gaining that confidence to go, I'm not doing this
mm,
anymore. I want to
mm.
do my own thing. I want to be in control. I'm good enough now. And I agree. George is an excellent songwriter, and his songs, pretty much from the White Album on through his solo career, are pretty terrific. But he did mature at a different rate or a different
Yeah,
timeline than McCartney and Lennon. That is also fair. So, you know what I mean? So, these interband dynamics, yeah, I find them
who knows?
fascinating, right? But that must have been a part of it. I doubt he was speaking up as vocally as he did, say, in the Let It Be sessions.
That's right. Those Let It Be where he actually says, "Let's split up and make some albums and come back." And yeah, yeah, it's it. Boy, we can go on forever. 95 Beck Odelay. So
Yeah.
I got turned on with Beck. Very odd style, but the things that you tell us, the listener, about this odd man. I don't know how else to characterize him.
Sure.
I've seen him live many times. He's surprisingly good, very talented. Just such a unique style. I don't know how to describe it, but Odelay really kind of broke through. Another great episode, Rob.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I did the research on that one too. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I led that one, although it was a long time ago. You do these things week over week. I don't remember every detail.
Mm.
But I was listening. I had that record when it first came out in the 90s. I was in high school and I saw him on that tour, and I've seen him a couple times since. So I've long admired him, certainly. So I was excited to get into his story. I think he's one of these guys. It is a rare breed, and dare I say, he's in this camp with the Beatles,
Mm.
where they are willing to keep changing their style.
Mm.
And here's how I feel about it. I think a lot after getting popular. I guess that's an important
Mm.
caveat. You
Mm.
get
Mm.
popular with one thing and you go, you know what? I'm going to take some left turns along the way.
Mm.
And I think there are relatively few artists that can do that, or at least do that and continue to stay relevant and have the public kind of come along with them. So Beck is definitely in that category for me. I don't love every single thing he's done, but that's okay. I respect where he's coming from. He's a true artist in my mind.
Yeah, he certainly is, and so unique, and he's got a lot of awards. You don't see him in a lot of interviews. You just don't see him that much, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so unique. And what was the one album, Rob? I was thinking about this where he actually released all of the music first, not the CD. He released the
Yeah.
writing,
Yeah.
the what am
Yeah.
I trying to say?
The sheet
The
music.
the sheet music.
Yeah. Yeah.
He released all the sheet music, said, "Hey, go make this, and I'll
Yeah.
tell you how I did it." And it was like a year before he did it. Has that ever been done before or after?
I'm so glad you brought that up because I saw him around the time that that was happening live. And it was as part of this on stage magazine show. It wasn't a Beck show, but he was there. And they were peppering his songs in. So yeah, I think that's a great example of like immense creativity. And
Yeah,
one of the things, you're right, I don't think anyone's done that. Just to be fully clear for the audience, right? He did not publish music. He published sheet music
right.
and then set up a website and said, people go make versions of these songs that I've given you the charts for, basically, and I'll post those. And I'm not even sure he ever did his own versions. Maybe he did them live, right? So, but one of the things he said that the reason he got interested in that, I heard him say this at the stage show. He said that after he had his first hit, Mellow Gold, Loser,
Loser.
that he was on tour or whatever for that. He's a young guy. And he had, of course, made that record with a lot of like chopping up samples and, a lot of what you might call studio wizardry, right? And at some point, the record company or somebody came to him during that wave of his initial fame and said, we'd like to put out a sheet music version of this. Can you work with, the sheet music writers to sort
Wow.
this out? And he just thought, it's like, this is such a weird, surreal experience that you're asking me to go back in that direction. He's like, I want to see what it's like in the other direction.
So cool, so
Interest,
unique.
great, super interesting guy.
Really. 122, The Carpenters. So we got 1970.
Mm.
We got, Karen Carpenter and Richard, the oddest dynamic. I didn't realize, I learned on your podcast how the parents so they're from New Haven. I'm from New Haven. My father
Oh,
actually
okay.
lived next to them when he came, he's from Italy when he came over. But I mean, her music, I mean, her voice, incredible. But Richard was the actual protege, and where the parents thought that was going to be everything, but we only really know Karen in that twosome. It's a very odd
Yeah,
band, and that music is so kind of light and non-edgy, and your friends bring it out, and it's true, but it's beautiful, right? And
sure.
it's wonderful, and she's an incredible drummer. Just a great episode, Rob.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's super interesting, right? What you're talking about is the parents really put their stock in their son,
Yeah, Richard.
who
Yeah,
who was also the firstborn,
yeah,
and they kind of treated Karen not so great as a result
right.
of that, even though she was the one who started lapping him musically, and that created a really weird dynamic, and it certainly had something to do with her tragic story and
Mm,
the trauma that she faced. But yeah,
mm,
really, really cool band. She has an iconic voice. Like I think I said, it was like warm milk,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
mean that in all the most positive
of
ways. So yeah, really
course.
interesting. Deep. I had never listened to them, by the way. My parents never put that kind of stuff on growing up, so that was a week where that was my first listen. at least
Mm.
with any kind of rapt attention to that music.
It's so wonderful to get exposed to this stuff, isn't it, Rob? It's
Absolutely.
there's so much beautiful, wonderful music out there. So one of your early ones, Jagged Little Pill, Alanis Morissette was just a
Yeah.
huge like transfer of music, and when it came out, it's all we listened to, and it was
Sure.
the 90s, and it was a woman, and she was angry, and
Yeah.
and it's just a big game changer. It was a wonderful album from beginning to end.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge hits. And as I think we observed on the podcast, they're different kinds of songs. Like she's
Yeah.
trying, it's not
Mm,
all one style, even though the first single was You Ought to Know. And I have a
right.
visceral memory of seeing that video on MTV
Mm,
like after midnight one night and going, whoa, what is this?
yes,
Right.
yes.
So that's kind of the one that stands out to me. But the reality is the other singles, all of which were very successful. I think there were 5 huge selling singles on that. It's one of the best selling albums of all time. They're kind of in different genres, which is really
Mm,
interesting to think about. So
hmm,
certainly have a ton of ton of respect for her. Another great You Ought to Know is another great one where Flea's playing bass. The bass line
yeah.
is just so sick that you might not think of when you think of that song, you know?
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, session musicians. Yeah, you're right. Hand in pocket and ironic. Those are very different styles. It's a very interesting point.
It feels like a songwriter that's still fishing around for what
Right.
the ultimate style will be, which is
Yeah,
perfectly fine, by the way. I love variety on
of
records. I'm not
course.
knocking it at all, but it's just interesting that if you're introduced to her by one or the other of those songs, you might think that all of it's going to be like that, but it's really not.
So you have a lot of episodes where you're talking, you're all your friends are really really honest, and you kind of go back and forth. It's really great
Yes.
camaraderie. And then we have one that's just not good. That's just bad, right?
Yeah, it
So
happens.
number two, Nina Cherry, right? Raw like sushi. So I
Yeah,
remember Buffalo Stance, the song. I
sure.
remember never hearing anything from her again. But after hearing your episode, I went back and listened. I was like, wow, that was why is this on this? Why is this on this list?
Yes. Well, this is the beauty of lists is that you get in and you can criticize the methodology behind the list. And let me just start by saying so we have shows called 1001 Album Complaints. Complaints is in the name. We're there. So far we've talked about things we've mostly praised, although we still like to nitpick and talk
Sure,
details
sure.
and hey, this
Nothing's
didn't
perfect.
work or they left
No.
some weird thing in there. But yeah, we also are fine with complaining
Yeah.
fully. And the Nena Cherry album had tons of, I think, poor song construction, straight up off key singing.
Yes.
It was just kind of bizarre. And we talked in the episode, I'm sure, about how she's a bit of a Nepo baby. I don't love that term, but she was kind of set up to win. More power to her. But yeah, I'd say it was a big fail. And I think even later when we around episode 51 maybe we revisited our worst tracks
That's
that we
right.
had discovered.
That's
I
right. Yeah.
think her song Man Child might have won the day on that one. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. But listen, love and respect to Nana Cherry. I got no problem with Nana
Of
Cherry, and
course.
let me be really clear here. What she has achieved is already artistically is already way greater than anything I could hope for. I get it. But I just think it's fun and it's honest for musicians to sit around and give their honest
Yes.
takes and to joke
Yes.
about stuff.
Of course, of course, and that comes across. There's never one. I never get a glimpse. I listen to many episodes where you guys are like arrogant. Where I think, oh,
Mhm.
that was just arrogant. You're honest. You. Sometimes you're trying to be funny, a little bit funny, and you just poke your jab, but you never like, this is beneath me. You didn't. It's never that kind of attitude. It's always like,
Sure.
this just didn't work. For me. It's
Yeah,
uh, uh,
it's subjective, right? And that is what we're trying to get across. And I
yeah.
think as the show has developed over the last 3 plus years, I think we've gotten better at riding that line. Nana Cherry was
Mm,
pretty early on.
this was.
But, I think over time, it's like what I like is if I'm going to say I like something, I want to be able to say why. I want to be able to articulately describe that. And similar, if I don't like something, I want to be able to say why. And of course, it's subjective. I'm not a dance music fan. I'm not a new metal fan. There are certain genres I think we acknowledge we just don't particularly like. But that said, I think I'm not looking at our whole list right now, but I think you would find exceptions. Maybe Duran Duran's Rio is an exception.
Mm,
Where genre on a genre level, I might assume, hey, I'm not really gonna like this. And
right.
yet it's The effort is there, the musicianship is there, the sequencing of the songs is there, and you go, "Yeah, it's really good."
Right, right. Yeah, you have to respect it. You do.
Absolutely.
You may not like it, but you respect those attributes you just mentioned. One of my favorite albums of all time, you do in episode 9, which is Paul's Boutique
Yeah,
by the Beastie Boys, where you talk about it's their second album. It never really did commercially well at all. But it's one of the, now it's looked back as one of the, breakthrough rap
absolutely.
albums. But I love the idea that you're doing that, which again, it doesn't seem like it's in a lot of your genres, but you still honestly approach it. And the facts you bring up about the Beastie Boys themselves, one of your buddies there said something so poignant that I never thought of. So their first album, License to Ills, when they did in their teenage years or late teenage years, and the
Yeah,
samples were all kind of music that you would listen to at that time. Paul's
sure.
Boutique was when they're 21, 22, and they meet the Dust Brothers, they split up, they come back there in LA. But then those samples are something that somebody would listen to in that age. I never really thought about it in that framework.
Yeah, fair enough, and I've long been a fan of the Beastie Boys too, I should point out, and
Mm.
I thought their memoir, I think it's just called The Beastie
Yeah,
Boys
that's
Book, was
right.
really
50 or
terrific.
something. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah.
Really terrific, and again, I read a lot of these things, so
Yeah.
I feel like I'm qualified to tell you which ones are good. I think that's a particularly good one.
Mm.
Gives you a nice overview of the history of New York hip hop as well as their history. So super cool. So much effort is being put in there,
Mm.
to make it cool. The one thing that I think I can never abide by is a perceived lack of trying. I
Mm.
do think some people, maybe they're already famous, maybe they're born with a silver spoon for whatever reason, the songs just sound underdeveloped. And you go, I just think
Mm.
they didn't try hard enough here. They didn't spend
Mm.
enough time on this. But to me, Paul's Boutique is like the polar opposite of that. It's
Right.
so crafted and carefully constructed. So to me, it's great. And I want to clarify, I did vote. I'm certain I voted Paul's Boutique on the list of albums you must hear before you die. But as we mentioned before, liking the album is not necessarily a proxy for saying that it is essential.
Mm. Mm.
We covered Donald Fagen's solo record, which I happen to love because I love Steely Dan, but I
Mm.
do not think it's an essential listen, just as an
Right.
example.
Right.
And so those, and sometimes I don't particularly like something, but I say, you know what, you do need to listen to it. I'm fine
Mm.
with either of those.
Yeah, it's a really important distinction there. Yeah, because sometimes I have some album like I have some I like the Monkees, right? And I mean, it's a pop band. It's
Yeah,
crafted by producers. It's written by very famous people, and there's just it just hits me. I was in the right spot in my life, and I liked watching them. And there's 10, 12 of those songs that I will sing along to when they come up in my list, gladly. It's not for everyone though.
sure.
And that's just the way it is. Just today, my buddy texted me and said, "The Girl I Knew Somewhere," which is one of their songs, goes, "I've never listened to this song, but I can't believe how great it is." Makes me feel good, right? Well, yeah, I've been listening to it for a while. You finally took my advice, and I mean, it's not Stairway to Heaven, but it's a good pop song, and it'll get you tapping a little bit.
Well, I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but the Monkees is coming up on the schedule.
Is it really?
Now, we haven't recorded it yet, and I haven't begun the research for it yet, but it is on the schedule for the summer.
Well, in '67, I think was it number one or number two with Sergeant Pepper's. I mean, they were big. They were big back then.
Yeah, and the one they have on the list is called Headquarters, and I
Oh,
think
Headquarters. That's
it's
the album.
yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
the one where they actually started writing the material and kind of
Yes.
getting more
Yep.
involved.
Yep.
So I think
Yep.
it'll be a really fun story to tell. Again, I
Of
haven't
course.
researched it yet. I'm excited to get into it. Not
Yeah.
I grew up with their hits, of course. I watched the TV show, but I don't think I've ever heard maybe not even a note of this album. So I am excited to get to it.
They tried to make Head an album with Jack Nicholson, and it didn't go well. But what is you talk about, you do a lot of reading. How about the biopics, like the Queen movie and the Elton John movie? Do
Sure.
you like those?
They're entertaining. Yeah. I mean, I'll watch any big budget film that gets made. I would say of those two, I like the Elton John one a bit better.
Yeah.
Queen was fun. I went to a sing along in San Francisco for that one, and it was a fun watch. But filmically, I feel like it was a little TV movie ish for my
Yeah. Yeah.
taste. But
Yeah.
I don't really consider. Also, I should say, I don't really consider those great sources of factual information.
Mm.
I think Hollywood is more willing to twist those things around. So we tend to rely, as I say that, I know that reading artist autobiographies are not always a great source of
Right. Good
factual
point.
information
Good point.
either,
Good point. Yeah.
but I think of those as inherently more true, as
Mm.
well as documentaries made, and so that's tends to be where a lot of our research comes from.
Yeah, and the movies tend to follow the similar trajectory. Start out low, get really high, get famous, drugs or fights, something happens, and then low again, then come back up. It's kind of the last autobiography I think I read on was Mike Love. I think that's a few years ago now. Have I read any
Okay.
other? And I thought it was pretty good. He's a controversial guy, right? It's very
Sure.
almost like the Carpenters, right? I mean, you have this prodigy who is, who was praised and is a genius, absolute genius. Who's his movie I thought was pretty good. Which one was that called? Where Brian Wilson when he was older, the younger and the older one,
Oh, I don't think
Paul
I saw that.
Dano. Yeah, Paul Dano played him, and
Okay.
that one was really good. But who knows how factually correct they are. Rob, what is it about Star Trek, the Beverly Crushers? So this is one of your bands.
Yeah,
I listen to the music. You take it very seriously, which you should. I mean, it's
yeah.
really cool. The one song, Holodeck 4, I'm laughing. It's got a almost Flight of the Concords feel to it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, in that vein, I mean, we've always loved comedy and the intersection of comedy and music, Flight of the Concords, Tenacious D, things like that. But I would say the aesthetic, this is Tom, also a host on 1001 Album Complaints and my band. And we're actually coming out with a follow up later this year. So we've been working on that. But I think the premise, like our aesthetic, is to take something silly and treat it with dead seriousness.
Yeah.
To me, that's funny. And perhaps I get that from Saturday Night Live or SCTV or various
Mm,
other, Kids in the Hall sketch shows that influenced us, or those musical touchstones we mentioned. But we always liked Next Generation, the show. Although, to be honest, I wouldn't really consider myself a Trekkie,
mm.
but I do like that version of the show. It was on when I was growing up. I watched it with my parents in the 90s. I think it's holds up. It's a pretty fun, almost like CSI in space, always like 1
Yeah,
hour
yeah,
contained
yeah,
little
yeah,
pieces,
yeah,
good
yeah.
characters, good acting. And it just started out as a joke. I was going to be away from the US for a little over a year. I had been jamming with my buddy Tom from the show and another guy, and right before I left I said, "Hey, we should make something of this." And then we really quickly wrote a couple tunes. They turned out really great
Hmm.
when we recorded them, and we're like, "We should do more. Like, this is fun." And so yeah, it's just kind of a silly concept treated with, I just see it as a vehicle, a writing prompt, if you will, that goes right about something in this world. And then it narrows your focus. It's less looking at the blank page and it's a little more constrained, and you go off and you write something interesting from the perspective of one of those characters.
But it must be a great creative outlet. I mean, the references, I want to slide down your Jeffries tube and
Sure.
may not be your first officer, but I'll be your number one. I mean, it's done so well, and the music is it's the musicianship is tight, and it's to make something like that must be so rewarding.
It's a lot of fun, making records, writing songs, producing them with a band, and putting out vinyl records is a huge thrill for me. This is one of the things I've found as a musician for most of my life, is that your relationship with music shifts over time. We were talking about it
Mm,
from the perspective of being a listener. Of course, I listened to the radio a lot more when I was in high school.
mm.
And in my 20s, I played in a band, and we played a lot of bar gigs over the years and got on the road and did all that stuff and really were trying hard. And then, of course, your life changes. You have a family, you have a career, but that's the way I stay in touch with that. I still play music a lot. I like to write and record it. And I think that's kind of where all of us are at on the show. Now it's become this thing where we all met up last summer for a weekend and did a recording project. So it's like,
Hmm.
instead of going skiing together and hanging out, we're in a recording studio for the weekend
Wow.
and making songs, and that'll come out next year probably. And having beers alongside and chopping it up just like we always would. So yeah, it's great fun.
Yeah, Ghost Beef is another band that you have, and the Chop Unlimited, which is really cool. So, what's your process of writing? Does the music come before the lyrics for you?
It's different. I tend to be a lyrics first guy, I would say, if I had to pick one, but it can come the other way. I find it helpful to I journal a lot just in my normal
Mm,
life, so I tend to kinda write
mm,
things down on paper quite a bit, and what I'll do usually as a songwriting exercise is I'll just kinda word vomit whatever's in my head or on a certain topic. Tends to work better if you narrow your focus, and then I'll go back through that 2 or 3 pages of notes, and I'll kinda find things that I liked, phraseology, things that could be hooks. That's a common place for me to start, and then I'll try to set some of that to music on my guitar or on my piano.
hmm. One of the points that one of your co-hosts made during the Beastie Boys was you had a big discussion on sampling, right?
Mm,
And as musicians, there was a certain time where sampling was looked down upon, where why not just? And one of your friends said something was so cool. It's like, well, we've already known the D chord and everybody's been using it, so why not just take it from? I'm paraphrasing, or so, his
yeah,
point was is that what's the difference there? And it was really 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 poignant. So I mean, how do you not let? I mean, every musician is a thief, right? I mean,
of
you're
course.
surrounded by music all the time. It's you got to just make that distinction. I just admire that so much, Rob. How do you to write a unique piece of music like that and lyrics is just must be so cool.
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the things that helped me get over the hump, because it was hard to get started, but I think George Harrison probably said something along these lines. I'm paraphrasing. You got to get the bad stuff out. You got to finish a bunch
Mm.
of songs, and then the good stuff starts coming.
Hmm.
And so I think part of the exercise is kind of getting over that you're writing the song. You're simply writing a song, and you can
Ah.
judge its quality later after it's done, which is often what I do. And I actually
Mhm.
take that approach all the way to the recording studio. For instance, for this Beverly Crushers record, we have more than enough material. I like it that way. And then we can pare it down and say, these are the best songs, these are the worst songs. Let's get rid of those, whatever we're going to do. Right. And so, and by the way, I should mention that as being a songwriter and going through the process of maybe writing it in your room on your instrument to bringing it to a band and arranging it to recording it, you have a lot of ups and downs emotionally.
Wow.
At least I
Wow.
have, of going like, this isn't going to work. This is terrible. I
Mm.
don't like
Mm.
this. The
Mm.
band kind of, there's this point we always talk about in the band room where the band has learned the outline of the song. They're playing the right notes, but it still sounds terrible. That's the most
Mm.
disheartening moment because you, as the songwriter, you have like a vision of how it's going to be in there in your head, but you haven't quite nailed it. There's something intangible. But the good news is it tends to
Wow.
go upward from there. Point of the story is I think that you kind of have to go through the creative process
Mm.
a little bit without judgment. And then I like to judge at the end of the line. I like to
Hmm.
look back at what I have and go, this is working, this isn't. Or maybe I see flaws but the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I'm sure any musician will tell you this. They listen back to their records. I can hear all the flaws. Trust me. I can hear more flaws
Mm.
than you.
Mm.
It's a photograph in time of what was going on, writing wise, playing wise. All that's okay, right? I approach it as like, I'm just trying to get better. So let me get through this version of the exercise and then I'm going to start again. And hopefully it'll get better and better as it goes.
We see that happening now with Prince, right? Where his family or whoever owns the rights, I know it's a big fight over there, but we're getting like these slow drips of songs every couple of weeks
Hmm.
that he never released before. The one that came out, Schoolyard, that came out a couple of weeks ago. I was like, man, this is great. This is something he didn't think was worthy of an album, or we
Yeah,
just don't know. Maybe he recorded it and just didn't forgot about it because I hear there's
could be.
thousands of songs, and uh, the creative process itself. This is the old story, I don't know how true it is. When Bob Dylan released "Along the Watchtower," Jimi Hendrix performed it in a couple weeks. When Bob Dylan saw him perform it, he said, "That's the way it's supposed to be. I'm never good. It's not my song. It's always been his." You
Right.
know, do you believe in that process where you get something, but it might not necessarily be yours?
Yeah. I mean, that would be an amazing experience as a songwriter, certainly. So I appreciate that Bob Dylan, who is one of my heroes and certainly
Yeah.
a terrific songwriter, but not always perceived as like the nicest, chillest dude in the world, I
Right.
have to say, that he kind of took that opportunity to acknowledge that. I believe in the power of a song, and I believe that songs can be reinvented and thus I believe they can be reclaimed. Pretty much anytime
Mm.
Nina Simone decides to do a song, it's sort of hers from that point on,
Oh,
for
yeah.
instance.
Yeah.
Actually, I had the experience exactly one time, much smaller scale, clearly, where
Hmm.
I wrote a song that never got released. I worked on it with some friends. This is years ago. It might still see the light of day. And then one time I was back in my hometown visiting my family. One of my co-hosts, Phil, was playing with his band on stage and they played that tune.
Huh.
And I got to admit, that was a really exciting moment for me. I know it's just
Oh.
a friend's band, like nothing too crazy happening there, but it was pretty darn cool.
Reading, I think it was Bono's book. I forgot where I heard this, but him and Edge, Bono and Edge of U2 wrote a song and swore it was in Roy Orbison's voice and refused to perform it. And they actually met him and they had him record it. It was the last song he ever recorded. She's a Mystery to Me, but
Hmm.
they wrote it and just they just it's his. We could just tell it's in the musicianship. There's another story where Tom Waits is sitting at a piano for 10 hours, slamming the keys, saying, where are you, fucking muse? Where are you? I'm here. I'm putting in the time. Where are you? And just that whole creative process to me is just amazing to me.
It is a bit mysterious, certainly, and I'm honored that I can even be a small part of it.
Mm.
And I think another tip, if you're trying to write material or trying to access that creativity, I think a lot of it's just about harnessing it. I think our
Hmm.
brains are all pretty darn creative, but the ideas tend to just kind of come and go as thoughts in your brain. And if
Yeah.
you don't write them down or record them on your little voice memo or whatever you need to do and then work them into something, you know what I mean? I additionally I work in my day job in Silicon Valley, and sometimes we say here ideas are cheap, right? It's the person who takes those ideas and develops them,
Mm.
who writes them down, writes down more stuff, formulates the pitch, and puts the hours in after the initial idea.
Hmm.
That's where the real gold is. And I think the same is true of creativity.
Yeah, I talk to these like fiction writers, Rob, and they say they start off with some characters and they have no idea where they're going to go, or they have an area where they're going to go, but they start writing and they start going in another direction. That
Mm.
just blows my mind. That's just when when I hear that, it's just incredible to me. I gotta think it's similar to musicianship and songwriting. I mean, you kind of have an idea, and then you get in the studio, and the producer adds in, and other people add in, and next thing you know, you have something that's very different than what you thought it would be.
Yes. I think that
It's
you need the kernel of
crucial.
something. You
Yeah,
need
need the
you
kernel.
need to start somewhere, and that
Mm,
starting point has been a lot of different things in my life. It could be a line, it could be a melody with a line.
mm,
It
mm,
could be I want a song that has, this kind of dropout where we can do these hits. You just get an
mm,
idea in your head, probably because you heard it or something similar to it in some other song that you like. Oh, what kind of want a song like this? That gives me a similar feeling as this song gives me. And you can build around that. And then, yes, I would agree. You kind of just have to let it go where it goes. And this might sound silly, but I did it yesterday. I was working on a song yesterday, a new song, and had my guitar in front of me and I was hitting a brick wall. And I had like one part. I needed to figure out where it went. And I go, I'm gonna go for a walk with no headphones or anything. And I'm
yeah.
just going to play the record of the part I just wrote in my head on loop until my brain tells me where it should go after that.
Wow.
That's it, right? And I really think everyone is capable to some extent of doing that. Of course, you can practice that skill, you can get better at it, but if I have something to draw on as a writer, it's because I've listened to so many records. So you kind of know how
Mm,
songs are supposed to go.
right.
We're
Right.
not really reinventing the wheel most of the time, let's be honest.
Yeah. And it's so rewarding. I envy that so much. I have friends that are songwriters too, and yeah, must be incredible. So I started my business, Rob, in the '90s. I was not paying attention to myself. I don't know if you ever went through this phase in your life before, but I was working way too much. I'm in the tech field. You're in Silicon Valley there, and I was eating poorly and drinking soda and working long hours. I got myself up to 340 pounds, and
Oh my.
yeah, the doctor said if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. My daughter was just born. So I spent the next 6, 7 months I lost 130 pounds. I kept it off the, can't be looked as a finishing line. You got to change what you do. And people always want the quick answer, Rob. How'd you do it? So my answer was discipline. That's how I did. I developed a routine. I had some willpower. I had some order, some direction. That's how I lost it. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life, Rob Kassees.
Yeah, I like to think that on many regards I am disciplined, but meaning that I'm very good at practicing my instruments
Hmm.
consistently, or at least I've been good in the last several years on that, and that's helped me get better. I'm good at setting aside time to, do the research that the podcast requires. I tend to be the person in bands and on the podcast, and I think all my bandmates and podcast hosts would agree to this, that is kind of the
You're the Paul.
manager, yeah, the
Yeah.
creative director of everything,
Yeah.
and it's sort of always sitting there on a back burner of my mind. So I think I have the kind of discipline to
Hmm.
keep things rolling, keep momentum going. And in fact, when we started the podcast, I know how this might sound, but I had sort of a condition. These are my oldest friends in the world, keep in
Good for
mind.
you.
I said I don't want to do it if we're not going to do at least 100 weekly episodes. Because do you know what I mean? Like, I want a
Right.
chance to get better at it. I want to build some kind of following. I want to have a shot. And so I think in those ways, I can be very disciplined. And I'd say my career is going pretty well. So I suppose I have a level of discipline and organization there too.
Good for you.
That said, to be clear, I think everyone struggles with this.
Hmm.
Everyone's got I would say it's still a struggle, even though I do have a good exercise routine to exercise consistently.
Hmm.
And that's just one example, right? But what my point is that I don't believe that anyone can be disciplined at 100% of the time. I
Right.
think that's a false goal to shoot for. And so it's hard. Let's just acknowledge that it's a struggle and things can throw you off of your routine and they can interrupt you in so many ways. That's just the nature of life. So, and one last thing is I've noticed that you can only focus on so many things. So, for instance, you
Hmm.
talked about a time when you were working way too many hours. We tend to quantify that as like, oh, the number of hours you were working was getting in the way of these other things. But I would argue the amount of your brain that is devoted to this thing called work means that you have less brain space to take care of the rest of your
Mm.
life. And
Mm.
that is certainly something I've found. And
Mm.
frankly, I even struggle with is like, I only have so much room on my brain's plate to care about things enough to be disciplined.
Hmm.
So you do have to learn to say no to certain things.
Yeah, really, really good points, Rob. I mean, I do not claim to be the king of discipline. My God, I fall short. I'm deeply flawed individual, and there's just certain areas that I focus on. And it's funny. I there's this musician duo that I really like that I listen to, and I asked them to be on the podcast, and they're like, we got no discipline. We're the wrong people. And I said, I mean, having no discipline is even a form of discipline. I would say it's not like we sit and focus. Learning an instrument, like you said,
Sure.
requires a bit of self discipline. And
Of course.
there's no wrong answer, right? There's no wrong answer. It's just different. I believe it's a spectrum. It's my ongoing thesis of many things that we can all kind of strive at.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, even being an amateur musician all this long, I'm aware of the way in which many people who are in bands, they're in bands so they don't have to be organized or
Mm,
disciplines. And maybe organized and disciplined are two different things. But I was always a fan when I was in a band. I think this helps your career. Other things as well is show up early,
yeah.
be there on time, be ready to go. Just like the little things that people do notice about you that can make a big difference. Because to be honest, a lot of people can't get those little things correct.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, that they're in a band because they don't want structure and they don't want kind of some people have a militant view of discipline. I hear people's, when I talk to people, they're like, well, that means punishment and, fold your bed and iron your shirt. And I said, well, that's there's no wrong answer. That's certainly one
Sure.
way. But yeah, so when some people do get kind of really turned off about it, what motivates you, Rob?
Getting better and learning, which I
Mm,
reckon are related. And, what you're talking about is in every band that I've observed or been in. one person has to lead,
Mm,
right? Because what is a band? It's a team, just like your teams at work, except there's not a clearly defined hierarchy. And the other challenge about leadership in that context, one, you haven't been granted a higher title than anyone else in most cases.
mm,
They're just your friends who you're trying to hold together. Two is you don't really have an incentive structure. You can't, it's not so easy to fire your friends, and you
mm,
don't really have anything to reward them with when they do well. Because a lot of being in a band is putting in work for some hope of future gain, but who knows if it'll ever come,
mm,
right?
mm,
I do feel like I learned a lot about career-based leadership from those kind of experiences. But I suppose my point is, I think that in any group, someone has to step up and care more.
mm.
And that has been me historically in the situations I've been in. I think it was Paul McCartney in the Beatles. You
Sure
sense some of that
was.
resentment against Paul
Yes.
in the Get Back documentary, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's the boss.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to vent against the boss. And sometimes the boss gives you homework and tells you things you don't want to hear. But you need a boss. A team without a boss or a band without a boss does not work.
Right.
Anyway, sorry, that was a digression kind of from the last bit
Sure.
of, giving you my philosophy there. But to me, it's about learning more and getting better. My curiosity is what drives me.
Yeah, it certainly does. That you know, to divert back to the Get Back documentary, we also find out how important George Martin was.
Sure.
My goodness, what he did and documented and um, just kind of kept those boys aligned. It was incredible. The way I as the viewer, we as the viewer would finish the lyrics. He didn't know what the end of Get Back would be, and he's like, went to Afghanistan or forget what he said or Pakistan, and like, no, that's not it. It's this. I mean, we're
Right.
sitting here finishing his lyrics. I get so much enjoyment out of that. But your point about getting better and learning, I just can't imagine. It's my mission for this podcast. I just can't imagine a point in my life where I wouldn't be learning, and oh my god, and just getting better. So, given that motivation, Rob, how do
Hmm.
you measure success?
Great question. It's definitely a challenge for me to feel like I have achieved something as opposed to, hey, the journey continues. I got to the top
Mm,
of one mountain. I don't really take a lot of time to look around. I'm just sort of on to the next thing. And you can relate that to podcasting. The podcast has been going, like I said, every week for 3 years. It's
good
evolved a
for you.
lot. I know that we've gotten a lot better at what we do. We've innovated on segments, gotten to be better broadcasters. I think we've gotten funnier, etc. But it needs to continue, and we've amassed a certain number of listeners as well, which is awesome, right? It's amazing. And even as that number might tick up little by little every single month, which is great to look at, it's like, what is really the goal? How do you measure success? I think that if we're speaking idealistically, you should clearly write down beginning of the year, beginning of the month, whatever, on your birthday, what you're hoping to achieve. I do this sometimes.
Mm,
And then you kind of have signposted for yourself where you get a chance to feel good about yourself. Right. But I'll be the first to admit that for someone who is ambitious and motivated, and has a motor, as I like to say, it can be challenging. And I tend to kind of just move right on to the next thing. And people like my wife help remind me sometimes, like, hey, take a
mm,
beat here. This is cool. What just happened was really cool. You wanted that. That's what success looks like. We can do this. And I've gotten better at reminding myself of the same thing, but basically defining it, recently defining it ahead of time can be really helpful, whatever it might be. So I think that itself is a creative exercise that each individual has to go through, right? You can argue that just evolving is success in its own right, which I do define it that way. But over time, what I've gotten better at is creatively saying, "Hey, this is really cool. I want to have this goal in life. I want to." I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but yeah, I want to get better at guitar. How do I define better? Well, it's a murky definition, but I
mm,
feel very confident that if I practice for 20 minutes a day with that metronome for a year, I will get better. And you know
Mm,
what? When I look back at the last year, I am 100% sure that's true.
mm,
Maybe
mm.
it's not well defined, but I've defined it like in my own head. So that was a real runaround answer to your question, but I guess I'm saying it's hard to define success clearly if you continue to be ambitious.
Yeah, and it's a moving scale, right? I mean,
Sure.
success. There's no right answer to that one either, right? We talk about discipline. I mean, success is such a. It means so much to so many people. It can be so different. Right. I love the podcast. I love what you do. I was so excited when we set this up. Thanks so much for your time today. Anybody listening today, how can they watch? How can they get in touch with you?
Yes, you can find 1001 Album Complaints on everywhere. Find podcasts or Pervade. Spotify is our biggest channel just because it has the music right in there and we link out to the songs we're talking about. So that's certainly convenient, but you can also find it on Apple Podcasts or Overcast or any other podcast app. We also have an Instagram at 1001 Album Complaints. That's the number 1001 Album Complaints. And we have a YouTube channel, The Chop Unlimited, where we post the podcast as well as clips and other things we're doing with our music. So I think all those are great ways, but I would suggest jumping into the podcast, pick a record you like. Hopefully we like it too. That usually works out the best. But just remember that we're coming at it from love and respect, perspective, and trying to entertain you while we educate you.
Yeah, and you do a good job in the preface in the beginning of explaining that how we don't take yourselves too seriously, and you're
Sure.
giving your opinions. It's really cool. Rob, thanks so much for your time, man. If I get out into the greater Sacramento area anytime soon, we'll get a cup of tea.
Awesome. That'd be terrific. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again. You be well.
You too.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.